they liked it there. They liked the environment. Some people, why do people live in the middle of the mountains or in a prairie surrounded by nothing? Because people like the solitude. They're very much, that's who they are, is they like to be by themselves. It's very rural. I mean, it's really a rural small town that's unincorporated and not even designated a village or anything like that. One of the things that Anita and I had trouble with was what do we call it? You can't call it a town. It was never a government town, an organized town. It wasn't a city. It wasn't a village. I think we started calling it a hamlet because there's no usually governmental distinction of what that is. So it's just a group of people that lived in an area, and it got its name from the train station there. They assigned it the name Drawbridge. I think one of the first things we started is the island, because is an island out there, and it was formed between two sloughs. So then railroads started to happen. Well, from what I can tell from the research I found, the peninsula track was put in first, from San Francisco to, I don't know, probably San Jose or so. These two, my guess is entrepreneurial partners, one a politician and one a meatpacker. They just saw a business opportunity, and so they wanted to build this railroad originally from Newark to Santa Cruz through San Jose. Then they lay it out, and how do you get the least mile of tracks, obviously, and the least cost, and figure it all out. And so they decided to come through here, and the one thing they had to go across was these two waterways. So the impetus then was to build those bridges. Well, now they got the bridges. Well, they're going to turn. Somebody has to control them. They weren't. So they had to put somebody out there. Well, that puts a bridge tender out there. Well, you got to build him a place to live, and it was obviously a him at that time. So I had to do that, and he's out there all by himself the whole time. Just him. I don't know if his family was with him, for example. I don't know if he's a single man. Haven't seen any family pictures or anything. So he likely did it 10, 15, 20 years. I don't know. There's no discussion of any interim bridge tender. It's just him. And then he's like, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to bring my friends in for the weekend during duck hunting. So I'm sure that's the way it started. So, or maybe people coming then on the train when it was there, they saw it. And so they started saying, hey, we could, go duck hunting here. So people in the 20s and teens, 19 teens and 20s, were clearly visiting there and coming there at different times. There's a lot of photographs from all sorts of things. Kids would come out for the summer with the families, and the word of mouth, and people on their own, and their word of mouth, and it just kind of grew from there. About by 1926, there was 90 cabins. By then, there were a number of duck hunting cabins, gun cabins, whatever, that would come out. And they had seasonal ownership. They would come out in the winter and then sell it to some next guy or something. And then I don't know when South Drawbridge started to come. I haven't found that. When did South Drawbridge start to get built? Because that was more the permanent residents that stayed there year-round and actually commuted, either on the train, one direction or the other, or they walked into El Viso. And the story seems to me to be she found that place to be where she could be her own. She didn't have to bend to society's mores at the time of women should wear dresses, and if you're divorced, you don't remarry, and you don't get divorced anyway, and that whole thing. So divorced women don't raise kids. Whatever. So I admire a woman who stands out, and for her time, it was quite different. 3 divorces at that time. She was born in 1900. That's unusual. Raised a couple of kids. Apparently worked a large part of her life out of the home, and you had to use a gun. She sounds like she was kind of That's what I want. Has a personality. And there's no picture that I've ever seen her in other than slacks. And again, for that time, to me, that's kind of amazing. That same, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it, and I'm not going to follow these stereotypes. So that's probably why Nellie appealed to me so much. There's stages of rebellion, I'll call it. She and her granddaughter were watching TV, and they heard something out on the tracks. And she heard some sort of either people coming, people shooting, something. And so she told her granddaughter to get under the table, and she got her gun and went outside and shot in the air, and they all took off. Right about that time, 60s, I think, 50s, 60s, Oakland something, some Oakland paper did an article and called it a ghost town and essentially implied that nobody lived there. I do think the rise of automobile use had an impact because people who might come there in the summer now had other alternatives that were cost effective, shall we say, or cost available or something. But probably that's not a dominant causal, but I think it was a one factor. I think the major factor was the amount of sewage and stuff that was starting to go into Coyote Creek and affecting the marsh around it. Plus, at the same time, right in that time frame in the 30s, the salt ponds started being built. These levees up, and if you look at some of the old photographs, this was all marsh. So there were little sloughs and everything, and you could take these little sloughs all the way to Coyote, so water would flow in and out with tides, and it's just a lot of stuff going on with that kind of water flow. And now all of a sudden you constrain the water flow. It's within a pond. And oh, by the way, all those animals, and in particular birds, that were adapted to marsh, brackish marsh, saltwater marsh, freshwater marsh, were all of a sudden they didn't have those marshes, those reeds to nest in, to forage in, to be protected in from raptors and things. National wildlife refuges are formed for the wildlife. They're generally not formed as historical parks. So it is not common in refuges throughout the United States to have historical buildings that are kept good. There are a few exceptions to that, but that in general it's here for the wildlife, the endangered species, the marsh and everything. And that was, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did an evaluation. Is this an historical thing that's worth spending budget on? Yeah. Okay. Came back and said, no, there's lots of ghost towns around what's called abandoned areas or something, abandoned structure. And this has nothing unique to add to it, so we will not do anything. And that's continued. They assessed that and decided this wasn't enough and wasn't worth it. That's my understanding. So, and that's where it stayed. It has a lot of stories to tell us about that time. It's still it's a piece of perspective that helps us learn. I've always thought history teaches us something. If we learn about what it was like in history, that can teach us something. It helps us learn about our character. It helps us learn about who we might be, what are important to us.